Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Meyer, and I'm one of the co-directors of AI at Wharton. And welcome to AI Horizons, which is our webinar series in which we talk about different ways in which advances in AI are affecting people, affecting firms and organizations, and also affecting society as a whole. And today we've got three great speakers who are going to be talking about the general problem of how a firm's adoption of AI, how they're doing it, challenges that are coming that are associated with that, and so on. And the three speakers are, we have Anastasia Fetk, who's an assistant professor of finance at the Haas School at UC Berkeley. Christina Elheron, who's assistant professor of strategic management at the Rotman School up in Toronto. And finally, Gregor Schubert, who's assistant professor of finance at UCLA. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, and so to start off, we'll have Anastasia talking about her work. Now, what we're going to be doing is each panelist is going to talk for about maybe 10 minutes or so and share some of their work. And then maybe afterwards, we'll have a conversation among ourselves and so forth. So it's all yours, Anastasia.
Super. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here talking about AI and its effect on firms and workers. You're able to see my slides in full screen, right?
Yes.
All right, super. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit in terms of what can we expect that AI might do for firms, and then show you some evidence that my co-authors and I have found in our various prior work. So of course, one of the main things that are being discussed are productivity enhancements from AI, where artificial intelligence might automate some of the tasks, leading to cost cutting, producing things more efficiently, perhaps with less human labor input. And of course, this may lead to AI so-called stealing jobs or cutting down human employment. That's the first channel. And on the other end, the second channel is that AI can help innovate and create new tasks and new jobs and new products. There is an increased potential to explore quickly, explore efficiently, discover new things that can actually complement soft skills such as sales or product management. Might also complement technical labor that is involved in running experiments or bringing the products to market. And in this channel, AI wouldn't steal job, it can actually create new employment and increase total employment. It would just lead to a reallocation of labor from some tasks or some types of workers to others. So what do we see empirically? And the answer is that, of course, it does depend on the task and the setting. There are some settings in which we really see the kind of full scope of channel one of AI potentially replacing human labor. If human labor is something that is very similar to the types of work that machine learning and artificial intelligence can do. I have one paper with Tatiana Fedek, James Hudson, Natalia Himich that looks at the audit sector. Audit is something that is very standardized, has clear regulations. There isn't that much potential to experiment or come up with new products. It also relies very heavily on prediction and anomaly detection, which is exactly the kinds of things that AI does. So of course, we see a high penetration of AI in audit firms, or these are the types of firms like PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young's that really we think of as being ready to adopt new technologies. And the effects that we see in those firms when they do adopt AI is that they do a better job. So financial audits that get audited by auditors using AI end up having fewer restatements further down, fewer material restatements, fewer SEC investigations, and some additional benefits to clients that get passed on in terms of efficiency in lower audit fees. On the employment side, in audit firms, we do see a decline. If they're able to do the work better and more efficiently, perhaps they need fewer workers to do the same amount of work. And it's not immediate. It takes a couple of years, but 3 years, 4 years after adopting artificial intelligence, we see that those firms are having declines in employment of about 3.5% decline in junior employees, so associates that are actually doing the work 3 years later, and up to 7% 4 years later. That's in a specific setting that is especially well suited to potentially being automated by AI. That's not necessarily what we see in other industries. In other industries, there's a lot of discussion of using AI more creatively for product design, for improving, tailoring products to customer taste, to potentially even discovering breakthrough new products. So for example, Moderna leadership were saying that previously it might take years to do something like come up with the COVID vaccine. With the use of AI and machine learning, that experimentation process becomes much faster. So they were able to develop and produce the COVID vaccine in only 65 days. So what we see across the board, so if you look at all industries, all publicly traded firms for which we're able to measure AI investments, for which we see enough of the workforce to identify that these firms are hiring AI workers, and for which, of course, we're able to observe the outcome data, we see that AI is beneficial in terms of firm growth. So firms that invest more in AI tend to grow faster. This is over the course of a decade. So think about these coefficients are scaled roughly by 10. So 2% sales growth per year higher for firms that have one standard deviation larger investments in artificial intelligence. That's the first bar there. Interestingly, we actually see a very similar effect on employment. So firms that invest in artificial intelligence end up employing more workers overall, or growing in their employment more than firms that do not invest in artificial intelligence as much. This is from my paper with Tanya Bobina, Alex Hay, and James Hudson on AI firm growth and product innovation. And of course, as the title indicates, a lot of this growth is coming not through efficiency gains, not by replacing human labor, but through innovation, product innovation in particular. So when we take a look at how these firms' investments in AI translate into innovation and efficiency gains, well, on efficiency gains, we get null results. If sales is going up, employment is going up, similarly to sales, then sales per worker is actually staying flat. There's an insignificant increase in sales per worker, a zero effect on revenue TFP, and actually an insignificant increase in process patents. We differentiate patents into process patents, which are more about the internal processes and about efficiency gains, and product patents, which are more about innovation and new products. Contrast the last bar here, the insignificant positive effect on process patents, with the middle bar here, which is product patents. Large, significant effect specifically on product patents. So the firms that are investing in AI are much more likely to patent things related to new products than to internal processes. Similarly, they see a large increase in trademarks, and they also see a positive, albeit insignificant, increase in the changes in product mix descriptions in their 10Ks. So these firms are coming up with new products, and they're selling more, even though that requires them to hire more employees. So they're growing the overall employment base. But are they hiring different people, right? Coming back to those two channels at the beginning and the fact that some tasks may be complementary to AI, some tasks may be substitutes to AI. In general, across most industries, we see this complementarity. We see that firms investing in AI are hiring more workers, but is the composition of their labor force changing? We have another paper with Tanya, Alex, and James, which looks at how firms' investments in artificial intelligence correspond to the changes in their workforces. And we'll look here at various characteristics of the workforce in terms of skill and in terms of the hierarchical composition. What we see is that firms that invest more in AI start tilting towards more educated workforces. So the share of college, master's, and doctoral degree workers goes up as firms invest in AI compared to firms that are not investing in AI. And the share of workers without a college degree correspondingly declines. They're also tilting towards more technical workers. So as firms invest in AI, that corresponds to increasing the share of workers with STEM degrees, declining shares of workers with social science degrees. And finally, on the technical side, we also see that the requirements for the jobs, so not just the types of workers that end up hired, but also what the firms list, are also asking more for IT skills, for analysis skills, and asking less for supply chain, finance, maintenance type skills. That's in terms of the upskilling of the workforce. So we see in general the workforce becomes more skilled, so more educated and more technical, as firms are investing in AI. What about the composition of the workforce across the hierarchical level? So are we leaning more towards top-heavy firms? Are we leaning more towards independent, deputized, low-level employees? And the answer is the latter. So as firms invest more in artificial intelligence, they actually increase the share of the employees or junior employees. So these are either entry level or they don't have to be. They're independent contributors. So think of a software engineer who's working on their own, who's not managing a team, who may be very experienced, but who's sort of a solo contributor. That's the share of workers that is increasing as firms are investing in it. In contrast, the levels that are proportionally decreasing. So remember that overall the pie is growing. Firms that invest in AI are hiring more workers. So it's not necessarily that they're firing in middle management. It's just that the additional workers they're bringing on tend to be at the independent contributor level. Middle management, senior management proportionally decline compared to these junior employees. So what we draw from this combination of results in the paper and workforce composition is that as firms invest in artificial intelligence, they hire more high-skilled workers, educated technical workers who are able to perform their jobs more independently. So we get more independent contributors. We don't need as much of a heavy middle management, upper management level to coordinate that. These workers become more deputized and more able to contribute on their own with their skills plus AI tools. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how all of this aggregates. So what happens kind of at the industry level. And before I talk about the industry level, I want to talk a little bit about the heterogeneity between the firms. That is going to show us some inequality between firms that then aggregates up to industry level. So this is going back to the first paper with Tanya, Alex, and James, AI from Growth and Product Innovation, where at the end we look at whether those gains, the increases in sales, employment, market value by firms that invest in AI, whether they're evenly distributed between different types of firms. And we slice firms by their ex-ante, size, or productivity. Results are similar on those two. Here I'm showing sliced by size. So firms are sliced into terciles based on size. And then we estimate the effects of one standard deviation larger investments in artificial intelligence in each tercile of firm size. And what we see is that the effect is largest for the largest firms, so the firms in the top tercile of size. The effect is milder in the middle tercile of firms, and it's actually null in the smallest tercile of firms. So the gains from AI are not evenly distributed across firms. Firms that are already large, therefore already have a lot of data and capacity to really take advantage of the new technology, they're the ones who benefit most as they invest in that new technology. Smaller firms, even if they invest in AI, they're just not able to draw as much benefit from it because they don't have as much of data and existing infrastructure to take advantage of the technology. At the industry level, what this means is that there is a positive correlation between industry level investments in artificial intelligence and industry concentration. So industries where we see more penetration of AI are industries that are becoming more concentrated. Now, to date, so looking at that first decade, the 2010s, we don't yet see that reflected in markups. So if we look at markups of the firms that are investing more in AI, we still find a null result. So the concentration has not yet turned into market power that is charging higher prices to consumers, but that's something that is worth being cautious about, as it may well be that the first step is capturing market share, and then the second step will be exercising market power. We do see a positive relationship between AI investments by firms in an industry and increasing concentration in that industry. So overall, what we see in terms of the impact of AI on both firms and workers is that there are benefits from investing in AI to firms. In some industries, those benefits can take the form of automating key tasks in industries like audit. In most industries, though, to date, in that first decade, what we saw is that AI is spurring growth through product innovation. So that seems to be the main application. We see a lot more product patents and process patents. We see growth in sales, but we also see growth in costs, and basically cost of goods sold, operating expenses, employment, and all of the inputs. Those firms are just scaling up by producing more and a variety of products. In most industries, as a result, AI is actually complementary to human labor, meaning employment grows with AI investments, but the composition of that employment does evolve. And so firms investing more in artificial intelligence tend to tilt towards more educated, technical workforces. But the hierarchy is flattening, so those technical educated workers are working in as independent contributors who are able to be deputized and not need as much management. And so it's kind of coming back to a really big picture, what might be the dangers of AI, which what we should be concerned about. We find that today AI is not meaningfully reducing jobs. In general, employment is increasing, but it is reallocating jobs. So definitely things like upskilling the workforce are relevant, and that's something that should be thought about. Plus, and this is what I showed kind of at the end, AI seems to be making industries more concentrated, and that's also something that to date has not had negative effects in terms of flowing into markups, but something that is worth being cautious about going forward. Thank you.
Great, that's awesome stuff. I have a couple questions that came to me as you were going through it. One of which is, let's say, take the case of auditing. Is the use of AI in that particular context making it better? Okay, in other words, is the quality of audits, is the quality of problems that are being detected higher now than it used to be? Or is it just basically same quality, now just robots are doing or algorithms are doing it and we used to be people doing it?
So definitely quality is the first order effect. And actually, our main result is that it improves quality in terms of fewer restatements, fewer investigations, so fewer kind of negative outcomes
Right,
associated with the
right.
financial statements that are being audited by firms invested in AI. And when we talk, because in that paper we also did a survey basically of audit partners. When we asked them, do you use AI? How do you use AI? How do you see it changing your business?
Mhm.
They don't even actually think about the labor displacement. They think about the quality improvement first and
Sure, yeah,
foremost. So they
yeah.
say, look, in audit, it's all about sampling, right? We go out and we can attest, check everything. We check some things, and then we extrapolate that if those things are okay, everything else is okay.
Yeah.
And maybe without any tools, we would sample at random. With tools like machine learning, AI, we can detect the high risk areas, right? Like what looks abnormal, and then we go and we check that. So we are directing, and they think of it as this at the beginning, the same amount of human attention, just directed better. And so they're more likely to find the issues, then less likely to have
Mhm.
misstatements
Mhm.
later on. But then in the same conversation, they say, and this is great because then any of like our associates, they do a better job, and maybe they're able to do more audits. And
Right.
of course, what that means further down the line, and it takes several years, is that maybe you need fewer associates. If each of them
Yeah.
does a better quality job and
Yeah.
can now handle more accounts, then you need less human labor input. But they are not even thinking, because it takes some time to
Yeah.
trickle
Yeah.
down to the labor cost cutting. They're
Well,
not even thinking about replacing. They're really thrilled with the quality improvements.
right, right. One thing though that one often hears is the worry is actually that while the quality is getting better, it's also producing a dumbing down of the workforce. That basically, when I'm looking at the sort of who are they hiring, well, it's junior people, STEM people. That sounds to me like they don't really care whether anybody has any training in auditing or whatnot. They just need somebody who can run the machine. And so, is it the case that the people that in these companies where they're basically using AI or getting better returns, actually the people if they had to, nobody really could do an audit themselves.
That's a great question. So, and the result on the labor composition is not specific to audit. This is actually
Yeah,
looking at
right.
more
Sure. Yeah.
public firms. So, I guess audit firms tend to not be public, so they wouldn't be in that
Yeah.
sample.
Yeah.
The kind of CompuStat sample, and so they hire more people with those types of degrees and skills. But in terms of what is being replaced, right? So definitely the unskilled are being replaced. So we see a lower share of no college degree.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But is it kind of specific tasks, right, and skills that that maybe are kind of in that industry, right? Relevant skills that are being automated away. That much of granularity we don't
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
because in that analysis we're looking kind of
Yeah,
across the
so
board
it's
across.
replacing maybe auditing and accounting skills with computer science skills. But that's potentially dangerous because if you, down the road, if you don't know anybody actually knows the business, then,
If
that's not
things
necessarily
break,
good.
no one's
Yeah,
there
yeah.
to fix them.
And it's working now, and as long as it continues to work, it's fine. But then, on and so forth. So, wait, Danny, you guys have questions? Gregor or Christina?
I'm just curious about how you measure AI use, because that's what I'm about to speak about. And it'd be nice, I think, for people to understand, when we say firms with AI, how do we actually, detect that? Because that, I think, has different implications for how we interpret all of our findings collectively.
Yeah, great question. And I skipped all the technical details because I only had 10 minutes. Yeah, absolutely. So we measure firms' investments in AI by looking at whether they're hiring anybody who's doing specifically AI. So if they're hiring somebody who's a machine learning engineer, or who has a patent, who's producing during that job a patent on deep learning, that means that the firm is investing in AI. Because of course, we don't really get to see a very detailed picture of what is happening within the firm. But with our resume data, we're able to see everybody who's working at the firm, or most people who are working at the firm, about 60%. And so we're able to detect when they're hiring somebody who's doing AI. And that's when that's what we use as the primary measure of AI investments. We also augmented with things like detecting from the resume that they're using specific tools. So for example, if a firm has bought IBM Watson, Soft Anelia, that's also something we might see on the resume because people mentioned that they're using Watson. So we also have a robustness test where we include that. That tends to be complementary, so heavily correlated with hiring somebody internally who does AI. So there's also similar if we include this external AI use versus just use the firm's hiring to measure AI investments.
This, maybe one of you guys will get at this, but also, I guess there's also the kind of related question of what do you mean by AI? That presumably it goes all the way from, I do a regression and then I'm calling that AI, all the way up to something incredibly sophisticated, robots in the office. So it's that sort of thing. So when you, in your sense of looking at that, what's your sense of the
what we
distribution?
mean is, that's a question that we definitely had to think deeply about. What we want to capture, and then obviously how we capture it, what is it that we capture. What we want to capture are basically prediction technologies that are drawing inference, right, from larger data and more complex data. So visual, language, some different data formats, and that can do more complex, potentially nonlinear relationships. So that would be, more high-powered than a linear regression. But we're not looking specifically at, say, just neural networks and just generative AI. We consider basically machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision. Those are the main commercial areas of AI, and that's what we look for.
Well, thank you so much. That was really interesting work. And we'll turn it now over to Christina McGilleran. And Christina, do you want to, grab the screen?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. Let me just make sure I can choose the right screen here. Are you seeing my proper looking slide deck and not my messy notes to myself?
Yeah, or no, we don't see your email or anything like that. So
that's a relief because I'm teaching this term, so there's a lot of student emails in there. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. There's a lot of interest right now thinking about this fast-moving technology and the implications it's going to have. And I think a key problem that we're grappling with is what my co-author Eric Nielsen refers to as flying blind, that we're trying to navigate this really fast-moving technological landscape with some very limited evidence about what firms are actually doing with it. We mentioned in the discussion this question of how do we know what firms are doing? How do we measure AI use? Well, that's what this couple of papers I'm going to just touch on today are geared to do. So this is joint work with MJ Yang, Eric Brynjolfsson, who's now at Stanford, and Zach Croft at Census, But it harkens back to this earlier paper that just was published this year that we called AI Adoption in America, Who, What, and Where, and many other details. It's a very rich paper, and I'm going to have to refer you to the open access version for the details. But this is joint with J. Frank Lee at UBC, and then again, Eric and our co-authors at Census, Zachary Croft, Emin Dinersatz, Lucia Foster, and Nick Zolis. And what we did in this first study, we're looking at a slightly different time period that Anastasia mentioned. This is going out, it's a survey that went out in 2018 to 850,000 firms in the United States. So we're able to get this very, very broad cross-section asking about what they are actually doing with AI in production as of 2017. And what bubbles up very rapidly out of this is that the use, no matter how we slice it, was very low at a time when we were hearing statistics that most firms have it, 80% of firms have it. This is pre-generative AI, but there was already a great deal of hype surrounding this idea that we could, lower the cost of prediction, that we could use past data to inform the future or remove uncertainty from a range of decisions. In fact, going back to our question about what do we mean by AI, we were very concerned that this was not very crisp, and that the best way to get at this was to triangulate on, the different technologies that quickly get lumped into this overarching term of AI. So we asked separately about the use in production. So this is about the actual deployment in the production of the goods and services that the firm sells, of automated vehicles, machine learning, machine vision, natural language processing, and voice recognition. And putting our thumb on the scale and saying, well, we're going to count you as having AI if you do any of these things at any level. And you can see buried in the bar chart that we're looking at different measures of intensity as well. So we can see testing but not using, less than 5%, between 5 and 25% of production, or more than 25%. Even if we just want to see if you've crossed that threshold into some use, any use is really only around 5.8%. And if we weight it by employment, we get maybe to 18, but really the use in production was much lower than sort of the popular conversation around this. And so, the question is, what's going on here? How can the different views of this phenomenon be so different? And I think some of it has to do with this question that Anastasia mentioned of size. And so it's very common that we can only see things where they bubble up into the public sphere. So public firms, CompuStat data, some of the consulting firms that are giving us statistics are looking at their own customer bases. And if we include the vast majority of firms in the US that are actually relatively small, our averages are much lower. When we look at the largest firms, this is where we start to see evidence of more than half. So amongst the largest firms, we're seeing 62% are using AI in production. And so the very next question I get is, what is driving this? What can we say about what promotes or hinders the use of AI by firms? And we can't tell you a lot in this study about all the firms, but we have this unusually detailed insight into this large sample of 75,000 startups. So in the paper, we go into detail into these young firms and say, what are the other factors that are accompanying AI use? And what's really unusual about our data is that we can really zero into characteristics of the founders, their motivation for starting the firm, other things about their capitalization, their innovation strategy, and their growth strategies. And what bubbles out of this is, I think, very instructive and relates to some of what Anastasia shared just before this, which is that we are seeing this growth-oriented activity coming alongside AI use. So VC funding and high startup capitalization is a big deal for AI use in the startup sample. And product and process innovation are very important. And we have a direct measure of whether they're innovating in their products or their processes. So this may be a slightly different measure than what we can infer from patent data, for instance. And what we see actually is that, this patenting, this innovation in the production process, this focus on innovation is very complementary to the AI use. And then finally, that there's a real, it looks small, but it's still non-trivial importance of the growth-oriented strategy of the firm, that this doesn't seem to be so much about efficiency or cost cutting, but really firms that are engaged in trying to expand their market, either size or into new markets. So this is one snapshot. It comes from a little bit ago. And so there's often a lot of question about how relevant are those findings to today, because surely this time things are moving differently. This is so much faster. And so what I can share is hot off the presses, just disclosed by the US Census Bureau. In fact, we have some findings that are pending that I can only hint at from 2021. And this is coming from the Management and Organizational Practices Survey. It's a deep dive into the US manufacturing sector. And it's a really representative sample. We get 10% of all the plants, but 70% of the sector is in the certainty sample with a very high response rate. And I don't have time to get into it, but our adoption rates look very similar to an even more recent study that Census put out in 2024, where we can see that some of these adoption rates are still not taking off as fast as maybe some of the hype would indicate. And again, I don't have time to get into all the guts of this, but some of the key findings I think are illustrative and important for the audience who are tuning into this talk today. So the first is that we see, again, a very low average rate of adoption. So the mean population weighted adoption of any AI-related technology. And Bob, you asked this question about how do we define AI? We actually distinguish in the survey between the use of data and descriptive analytics, the use of predictive analytics in terms of forming predictions based on past data, but in sort of a very deterministic way. This includes regression analysis, things that aren't self-learning, and then actual self-learning algorithms that can do some of the things that we associate with the most modern AI today. So we actually are disentangling those in the survey. When we ask managers of these establishments, what is happening with your adoption? What's potentially a barrier to using AI as soon or as much as you would like to? And the first thing that bubbles up is cost. That there's still this lack of obvious return on investment. It's either too costly to implement, or they don't think they're going to get their returns on those costs. And a lot of that is associated with the next barrier, which is the lack of visible or obvious or understandable use cases. So there's this real disconnect between what the technology is capable of and what firms see as a really good application, at least in the near term. And that gap is something that is really preventing some of the speed of diffusion we might have expected. The other is a skills gap. So the lack of expertise or skills at the establishment is a bit of a problem. Employee attitudes towards AI seems to be a bit of a barrier. And although it's often talked about, it's much lower in scale. In our survey, there's still a lot of uncertainty about government regulations, industry standards, things that allow firms to invest, having some sense about what the future is going to hold. So this gives us a little sense of, if we wanted to speed up adoption, there's a lot of concern about productivity these days. Maybe AI could help with that. We would need more of the right kind of diffusion of the technology for those productivity gains to unlock. These are some of the barriers that we have to overcome. So I'd like to put this slide of the steam engine up. This is all very evocative to me and those of us who have studied technology for a long time, of these general purpose technologies that have this tremendous technological power potential, but they take a long time to diffuse. The steam engine took a century. Computers were faster, about 40 years before it was really felt in the productivity statistics. And we think we're in the middle of a similar adjustment with AI. So This bit of an eye chart is a regression table where we're looking at the adoption of AI, but we're doing something kind of tricky in the econometrics where we're accounting for the fact that firms that think they'll do well are more likely to adopt. And so we're using an instrumental variables approach to try to deal with this, what we call selection into treatment. Unfortunately, when we just look at firms that voluntarily adopt technology, often the picture is a little rosier than if we were to think about the causal impact. So this table is looking at the causal impact of AI in this manufacturing sample. And unfortunately, what we find in the short term is a lot of pain, short-term pain. We see a big decline in total factor productivity. We think this is not value destruction at scale, but rather these adjustment costs, because we're seeing this huge increase in inventories. That's column 2. We're seeing firms putting in more robots in their production process. So they're reconfiguring their production process. And maybe less good news, we are seeing them shed employment. Now, this is a short-term picture, and I generally caution people not to panic. I think we have to look at the longer term, and in what's coming next, we're able to look at this earlier survey and see how things unfold over time. I just don't have those results clear to share today. So in conclusion, looking at predictive AI, so not generative AI, we see still potentially a surprising low use in production. It's very skewed by size. So we have to think a lot about, what samples and what context we're examining this phenomenon in, because the size composition will really influence our takeaways from that. The short-term relationship seems to be negative. It seems to be associated with these adjustment costs. So my co-author, Eric, and some other really leading researchers in this area, Chad Severson and Dan Rock, have this nice paper on the productivity J-curve. And that's at the macroeconomic level, where we see a decline in productivity in the short term while firms adjust to new technologies. We think we're seeing this at the micro level in this data. And so the thing we need to solve sort of collectively is how to flatten that curve moving forward. We hope this is a short-term problem with a longer-term benefit, but those results are pending, and you'll have to check back with me hopefully in a few weeks. So thanks very much.
Christina, that was amazing stuff. A question I have for you, but really I could pose it to any one of the three of you, is a lot of what you've been talking about is AI as viewed from the firm and so forth. To what degree, when firms are thinking about adopting AI, they're thinking about the customer side of it? So for example, you could imagine, certainly it's the case that if you have an accounting firm, which is, because it's using AI, now basically it's providing a better product to customers, that with fewer investigations and so forth. Or, if you're a manufacturing company and you actually make superior cars, so basically there's the quality of the output is significantly better. But certainly there might be some circumstances of some types of things where customers really don't like the use of AI. Like, for example, to come to them and say, look, we're abandoning the use of people for our car designs, and this is an AI design. And there's a lot of work showing that people don't like AI artwork. Just simply saying that it came from AI is not a positive, even if it may well be objectively better. So in your sense, do companies ever think about how this will affect customers' responses to their use of AI?
Well, the answer to that is not available in my data.
Okay. Well, then you're just your intuition,
that
or
it's
in
in
talking
my
with
data,
companies.
it'll be captured by the prices that firms are able to charge for their goods and services,
right.
and the total sales. So that all gets wrapped up into our measure. And so both the good and the bad and the ugly are all mixed in all together. We don't have visibility to that nuance in our studies.
I would respond to this by actually adding a question to it and then passing it to Anastasia, who probably knows much more about this. Which is that I think one thing that it really is going to depend on is to what degree your customers are willing to take the productivity increases that you're generating and either will demand lower prices as a result of that, or are happy with sort of a higher quality of product. And so that will depend a lot on different markets. And so I'm intrigued to know, for instance, what this means for markets like consulting or auditing, where traditionally there's sort of a payment by the hour oftentimes, and so if you suddenly take half the hours to do an audit, do you only charge half the price? Do you charge twice the price per hour? Like, do you move towards a per output based measure of pricing? And so that might depend a lot too on the competitive dynamics.
Yeah, and I think audit is the only place where we've really thought a little bit, at least, about the client aspect, just because there we see the clients, right? So in the audit project, we'll look at auditors of public firms because that's public information. So while the audit firms themselves are not public, they're public clients, right? I'm being audited by PwC or KPMG. And so in the interviews is definitely something that comes up. The audit partners say the clients want AI. So I think this just depends on how sophisticated, right, the sector and the clients are. So maybe the AI artwork is probably less appealing, but for a client to, be told that their audit firm is using all the latest technology, there is demand. So they do want it to be used. One thing that we thought, and I think it was brought up by our referees in that paper, was to what extent does actually the client's own sophistication in AI matter? And so we took a look at that, and the answer is that really it's not about the client, it is about the auditor. So we can measure AI investments of the client firm as well, and we put that in. That's a lot kind of less strongly predictive of quality improvements than the auditors. So it's not that there is a matching, right? That the AI skilled auditors are just auditing more AI skilled firms that already don't have any issues. That's really the audit firms that are kind of checking and finding the issues. And then finally, to Greg's question on the pricing, in the audit firms, we do see a decline and again, we see kind of, it's called like relationship level or engagement level fees. So we know how much this audit firm has charged to this audit client for this year. And the fees overall, so in total, the audit fees are declining. So they are passing on the efficiency gains to their clients, but fees per worker are slightly increasing. So the audit firm is earning more per employee because they're cutting down, the employees 3-4 years down the line, but they're kind of the rent is split between the customer and the provider and the firm providing the service.
Okay, that's great. That's really interesting. Okay, why don't we turn it over finally to you, Gregor, and get some of your views and some of your work.
Okay. Make this full screen. All right, can you see this full screen now? Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm going to be talking about research that is joined with Andrea Eisfeld and Bloody Tosca and Miao-Ben Zhang. And this is work that I think sort of attaches to where some of the previous work we've heard about ends, I think, in terms of the timeline, where we're only thinking about generative AI here. So we're thinking about this recent surge in technologies that allow you to generate images or text and sort of operate at the level of generating output that looks similar to what many people in white-collar tasks produce on a daily basis. And so we're focusing on that specific kind of generative AI. And there's sort of two broad things that you might think about that might drive the impact of this on the economy. On the one hand, there's a broad-based effect of this that is sometimes called a general purpose technology, where these improvements are likely to impact all workers in related jobs to some degree. And so every company is going to see a little bit of a productivity boost if their workers start using these tools to some degree. And that raises the question, then, are some companies going to benefit more or less? And what's going to happen to those workers? Do you need more of them? Do you need fewer? Does this substitute or complement for these workers? There's a separate category of impact on the economy that we don't really focus on in our research, but that's important to acknowledge, which is that, of course, there are concentrated companies that are oftentimes known as in the news as these like top 10 AI beneficiaries or something like that, where companies like NVIDIA or Microsoft are directly making the tools or the software that enables these new AI capabilities. And so those companies, of course, become a lot more valuable and their workers will benefit, but it's not as much of a broad-based productivity impact. It's that those companies sell the things that enable the AI boom. And so we focus our research on this first part of this broader-based productivity impact. And in particular, the way we try to measure where we should see impacts of this productivity change is that we go from tasks that might be exposed to AI technology and then look at what occupations are using those tasks and what firms employ people in those occupations. To make that slightly more specific, we take public data on what tasks are involved in each of more than 900 occupations, and then we just compare those tasks to a rubric of the kinds of things that generative AI is good at, and ask the question of whether or not you could make that task more productive immediately by just using a chatbot off the shelf, whether or not you could probably make that task more productive with some additional tooling around it, access to the internet or internal databases, or whether there's no way that generative AI is going to make this task more productive. So for instance, if one of your tasks is that you're working in landscaping and you're doing a lot of digging with a shovel, generative AI is not going to play a role in that. It is not going to impact your work. And then we take that task level scoring, aggregate it up to occupations, and then into firms by looking at firms' employment composition from LinkedIn to figure out what firms employ these workers where generative AI might play a big role in terms of changing their productivity. And what we find is that first at the occupation level, the most exposed jobs tend to be the ones that do a lot of the tasks that generative AI is very good at. So telemarketers, proofreaders, generative AI is very good at generating texts based on standardized scripted inputs, and then outputting sort of a customized version of that, for instance, for particular customers, and generally doing word processing. So a lot of tasks like secretaries and so on that do a lot of word processing to some degree, or programmers that also do a form of word processing just at a slightly more abstract level, are going to be impacted by these technologies a lot. And on the other end, I'm not going to show you this right now, but there's a large tail of jobs that involve physical manual labor that are not going to be impacted at all. As a result of impacting these white-collar jobs more, generative AI actually has an interesting pattern in terms of its impact on different jobs, in that it impacts higher-wage jobs more than lower-wage jobs. And this contrasts with previous waves of automation or technology, where oftentimes lower-skilled jobs or sort of middle-skilled jobs tended to be much more effective. And here it is the higher-skilled and higher-wage jobs that tend to have a much bigger likely impact of these new technologies. And then when we aggregate that up to companies, that of course then maps into companies that employ those types of workers. So this is a list of the top 15 exposed companies among large US companies that are publicly listed. So companies like IBM, Intuit, these big companies that do information processing or employ a lot of programmers are going to be very impacted. Whereas on the lower side, the least impacted large companies are going to be companies that work in transportation or food services, and therefore have a lot of workers doing sort of manual service tasks, which are not going to be affected by generative AI. So this is the sort of theoretical exposure based on the kind of tasks they do. Do these companies realize that and actually invest in AI skills as a result of this? I have some new research that I'm currently working on where I actually test this. And so if you look at this predicted exposure of companies to these productivity impacts, and you just compare it to the share of a company's job postings that then demand that workers come in with generative AI skills, you see this strong positive relationship where companies that are more likely to have a positive productivity impact are also then more likely to invest in AI skills when they're hiring new workers. So this does seem to actually predict firm hiring behavior to some degree. Now, what does this do to firm values? So do financial markets value this productivity impact of these new technologies? We do a very simple exercise where we take different stocks and sort them by their exposure to this new technology. And then we compare the most exposed portfolio to the least exposed portfolio and form the sort of long-short portfolio that we call artificial minus human that benefits if the stock values go up for the companies that are most exposed to generative AI productivity increases. And we find that this portfolio actually has very high outperformance during the short period after ChatGPT is released. So it looks like there's some sort of reevaluation of these companies by noticing that they might have a greater productivity as a result of this new technology. This is easier to see in the graph. So the most exposed companies' stock returns here are shown in orange, the least exposed in green, and then blue is the difference between those. So this long-short portfolio outperformance. And you can see that before ChatGPT is released, they all kind of perform similarly. And then when ChatGPT is released, this more exposed portfolio suddenly pulls away and seems to be revalued. And there's a big jump in their valuations relative to the least exposed companies. And then you can actually see this a little bit if you look at mid-March. There's another revaluation, an upward tick in this portfolio valuation when GPT-4 is released. So when we learn about additional capabilities of these tools. And so there seems to be...
Greg, can I just jump in with a quick question? What happened after that? I mean, is this sort of like a exuberance? Oh, ChatGPT is going to change everything. And then what's happened since then is people sort of come down to earth a little bit more for some of these companies? Or is it?
Yeah, when we first did this research, I guess we didn't have more data available because we were doing this literally in April. But if you extend this out a little bit, you'll see that the portfolios still have this gap.
Right.
But then over time, of course, like other factors start coming in, it becomes less of a clean analysis here to compare these portfolios, because you might have a lot of other factors in the long run that might drive these companies to have different. We haven't updated this recently to look at whether or not this persists until 2024, but that's something that we might look into. All right. Then we also then ask, what does this do to the workers who work at these firms, right? So what is the impact on labor? We've already heard Anastasia talk a little bit about this worker impact, and we have this big question of whether or not these technologies end up substituting for workers. Can you use the generative AI tool instead of a worker, or their colleague now does twice the work, so you don't need them anymore? Or does it complement them? Does it make them more productive and as a result a more valued worker for the firm, and that might actually increase demand for these workers? We try to distinguish this impact by focusing on what kinds of tasks are actually increased in their productivity by generative AI. So is it the core tasks that really add value to the firm and for which the firm is employing you? In which case, if generative AI can make those more productive and perhaps allow your colleague to take over the core tasks that you're doing, that might lead to more of a substituting effect. Or are these supplemental tasks that a worker does on a daily basis, but which are not essential for them to do? And so maybe freeing up some time from those tasks by automating them using generative AI allows the worker to focus on the tasks that are truly distinct and valuable for them, and thereby make them more valuable to the firm. And also makes it harder to replace them if the only tasks that are taken over are the tasks that are not really that important for the value chain that they're sitting in. And so we look at outcomes in the forms of job postings by firms. So are they increasing or decreasing their hiring? And at the national level, also at wages and employment in different occupations. And we find that in general, firms that have greater productivity exposure to generative AI do reduce their hiring on average, at least in this sort of shorter time window. And but that effect is much less negative if all the productivity impacts are coming from these supplemental tasks, and more negative if they're coming from core tasks that the workers are doing. And we then see the mirror image of that in firms having higher profits if they're able to automate workers' core tasks versus just their supplemental tasks. We see also at the national level that wages seem to have declined a little bit more for workers that are more exposed in their core tasks. But I want to caveat that this is probably a short-run effect, and we should wait a couple more years to see, as firms sort of retool their production processes, whether or not these effects might look very differently. The way you're using AI in the short run by sort of plugging in a tool in an existing production process might be very different from how you might use it in the long run, where you can figure out new ways of configuring your production processes around AI tools. And so overall, we find that this does seem to be a big technology shock that even in the short run has effects on firms, but there's a lot of heterogeneity, right? One result that I haven't shown here is, for instance, that it seems like a lot of the value is actually realized by firms that have sufficient data management capabilities. And I think this came out in the two other talks as well, which is that you really need to have some access to related skills in order to realize the value of AI. these technologies don't create value in a vacuum. And so at the same time, for workers, some workers are going to benefit more than others, depending on which particular tasks are exposed. And so I think there's a sort of subtle distinction here where we cannot always say, oh, there's AI is good or bad. It really depends on how exactly it's impacting particular workers or firms. You're muted again.
Yeah, I think, thanks so much. It was really amazing. One thing I think that it sort of really makes Gen AI sort of really interesting as an innovation is the fact that it kind of at one point in time dropped from the sky, okay? And it was not like, a gradual thing where, this time basically the model got a little bit better or whatnot. It's basically out of nowhere, it kind of appeared. And my sense is that for a lot of companies, and to some degree, maybe this is tempered off a little bit, there was a lot of initial, oh my God, we've got to do it. We got to know something about it, but they don't know really what it is. They don't know how they can apply it into their firms and that sort of stuff. And it was sort of almost kind of a point of hysteria of just wanting to bring people in and feeling if they don't adopt it, they're going to fall behind and so forth. In your work, do you find, to what degree have you found that to be the case? Where firms just kind of see the need for using GI without at the same time really knowing how to use it?
I think there was definitely an initial wave of enthusiasm of firms to sort of generically wanting to use these tools.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of relates to what I was saying at the end, is that many companies did not understand that there are particular things that these tools are good at and particular things they're not good at. And I think it's taken some time over the last year or two for people to figure out where is this actually going to be useful and where is it not going to be useful. And I think that's also been helped by developing more of a tool ecosystem around this, where there are now a lot of startups and consulting firms that have figured out where the sort of valuable tools are and can offer this more as an off-the-shelf package solution to companies, rather than companies having to build a lot of these things internally. And so a lot of procurement processes that look more like traditional procurement processes for SaaS products, for instance, where you can buy an off-the-shelf tool that does this for you, rather than suddenly like having all your employees scramble to experiment with use cases. So some of these things become more standardized and look more like normal firm level innovation and tool usage over time.
Yeah. Well, one final question I guess I have from you is one thing that's not on your list, and all three of you are professors, and I did not see on that list of professions that are most likely to be impacted by AI as academia, college professor. Was this like a deliberate omission on your part, or was this, what do you think?
I can speak to this a little bit. So I actually have a recent review paper with Andrew Eisfeld, where we try to think a little bit about what the impact is going to be on finance research. So we try to look through different use cases. And I think that you can already see that a lot of use cases in research are coming from new research methodologies that this is opening up, right? For instance, being able to apply a lot of these machine learning tools. I know Anastasia, for instance, in her research applies a lot of these tools, being able to apply these in our own research and therefore becoming more productive, accessing new data sets where we can extract information that previously wouldn't have been able to do this at scale. And at the same time, I have to say, like in my personal day, I use generative AI tools every single day to either help me with drafting text, doing sort of menial tasks, data analysis, programming, things like that. And so I think there's definitely an impact on what our days look like as a result of that.
Yeah.
I'm in the pit of the J curve. I find it very difficult to wrangle into making my tasks actually better. I find it not super fit for purpose for the sorts of things. And I think this is just a microcosm of something Gregor said that comes out of everything I've seen, not just with AI. I mean, this is coming at the end of a lot of waves of digitization and technological advance. I know it feels like this dropped from the sky, but it's really the culmination of all sorts of other fast-breaking innovations. And that key thing is the heterogeneity. that I think if we over-index on the averages, we are going to miss the point, that this is so uneven, that really being sharp about the contingencies and the context is going to be important, to not just like talk past each other in terms of what we're seeing.
Yeah, Anastasia, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely in the camp of studying kind of what happens when firms invest in AI. And of course, we don't have the same kind of CompuStat data on universities. So from that perspective, it's hard to say, right, how much more productive we'll become. It's definitely right. We see in Gregor's work that what would have previously been done by many research assistants is now being done by generative AI, right? The labeling of which tasks are more automatable versus not. And I have also some, I guess, again, meta research with my colleagues at Haas, Ulrike Malmendier and Alika Bod, and our PhD student Peja Uli, looking at how well generative AI does in settings like matching preferences and investments for potentially use in financial advice, and an ongoing project, and how well it does in terms of extracting basically factors that impact people's expectations, right? That previously from those free-form responses, you get some rating, right? I think inflation will be 2% or whatever. And then the why, kind of what influences that previously, again, would take a lot of manual labor, a lot of array labor. And we're seeing how well ChatGPT, basically generative AI, compares to arrays. So for sure, certain types of tasks that we have research assistants and do can be automated.
Yeah.
On education as a whole, I think definitely what Bob said earlier, where right, people don't like AI art, I don't think they would necessarily like to be taught by AI either.
Yeah. And I think as of just one final thing is, I think that, a lot of us, I think for probably most of you, have like a strict no AI use on final exams and all that kind of stuff. So in some weird situation of teaching technology and teaching advanced AI tools, while at the same time try to making sure that our students don't use them for a lot of different tasks and so forth. Well, anyway, we're about out of time, but thank you guys so much for your presentations. All three of them were awesome, and hopefully for anybody who's able to watch the webinar, they'll have your information and they can reach out to you individually for questions and possibilities of collaborating on some of the work you're doing. So thank you so much.